Firstly, let me get the tankers out of the way because I'm not going to bore you with her.
Death isn't the thing that rattles me now. It's the hush that falls after the last chord, the way a stadium sighs and you feel the night close in. I tried to fight on. I really did. But the body has its own mind, and it wouldn't budge. Between the aches and the flashes of faces, what I want most is to say cheers. To the mob that stood with me when the lights burned bright and when they dimmed. If this is my last bow, let it carry a thank you home to Birmingham, to the band of misfits who made a noise that wouldn't fade. That was the way the world remembered John, Michael, Ozzy Osbourne, the bloke from Aston who turned heavy music into a calling and chaos into theater, a dad who mucked about on telly, and a frontman who changed the sound of late nights for good. You know the image, the black coat, the outstretched arms, that mix of menace and kindness in the eyes, and a voice that somehow felt like trouble and comfort in the same breath. But behind the stagecraft, there was a human story that ran on grit, humor, and a stubborn will to keep showing up, even when the ground rocked under his feet. If any part of this journey ever nudged your own life, if a song got you through a rough arvo or made a long drive feel shorter, drop a memory below and stick around with us. We're building a small corner where people can feel things together without judgment. In the end, Ozzy's legend wasn't only built in arenas. It lived in kitchens late at night, in sharehouses with dusty speakers, in utes parked by the beach while mates argued over which riff was king. He wore the crown with a wink, copped the hits when life swung hard, and still found a way to laugh at himself, which, honestly, might be the bravest part. We're going to trace the final stretch with care, from the last hometown bow to the quiet moments that followed, not as gossip, but as a way of seeing the person beneath the persona, the husband, the father, the mate who wanted to leave the stage with a proper goodbye. Stay with me as we open the door on the setting where it all began, and see why that return to Birmingham wasn't just a gig, but a full-circle promise kept. The morning after that final show, Birmingham felt different. Shops opened a bit slower, radios played his songs without anyone asking, and people who had never met each other nodded in quiet recognition. They had all shared something rare the night before. At Villa Park, the stage crew were still packing cables, and the dark throne still sat there under a thin layer of dew, like it was waiting for him to come back. Ozzy had gone home with Sharon and the kids. They said he was tired but peaceful, talking about how the crowd looked like family. He mentioned the sea of faces, the smell of rain on metal, and that familiar Midlands accent, shouting his name one last time. For a man who had spent decades under lights, the simple act of going home felt like a reward. He sat in his garden that night, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea in his hand, and the distant sound of fans still singing in the streets. That was Ozzy's world now. Smaller, quieter, but still alive with echoes. He had been living with pain for years. The tremors, the fatigue, the long list of medical treatments that would have stopped anyone else. Yet every time someone asked why he kept pushing, he'd shrug and say, "Because it's what I do." That was not pride. It was identity. Music was not his job. It was his bloodstream. Even when doctors warned him to slow down, he'd sneak back into the studio, headphones on, eyes closed, lost in riffs and memories. Those close to him said he was scared of silence, not because he hated peace, but because silence made him think too much. So he filled it with sound, with laughter, with family. In the weeks leading up to that last concert, his friends said he had changed a little, softer around the edges. He started calling old mates from the Black Sabbath days, some he hadn't spoken to in years. He'd talk about the gigs, the madness, the tours, and then quietly thank them for being part of it. It was as if he was tidying up unfinished sentences before closing the book. Sharon noticed he was calmer too. The chaos that had once defined him was now replaced by something gentler, a kind of surrender, not giving up, just letting go. There was a small ceremony before the concert, private, no cameras. Ozzy had asked for a local choir to sing. It was the same choir that had performed at his school when he was a kid. He listened, eyes shut, and smiled. People there said it was one of the few times they saw him completely still. After that, he walked to the stage with help, the crowd waiting, the air thick with emotion. He whispered to Sharon, "This is it, love. Let's make it count." And he did. In the following days, the world began to understand what that night really meant. Fans from every continent flooded social media with clips, candles, tattoos, and old records spinning on turntables. They shared stories of how his songs had carried them through heartbreak, through loneliness, through the messy middle of life. Birmingham City Council announced they would preserve the throne and the stage as part of a memorial exhibit. His team began planning a permanent display called Working Class Hero, a name that captured exactly who he was, a man who never forgot where he came from, no matter how far he went. And yet, even as the tributes grew, the mood stayed grounded. People did not speak of him as a saint or a myth. They spoke of him like you would a mate who'd been through hell and still managed to laugh about it. That was the true legacy, not perfection, but resilience. Not fame, but the way he made people feel less alone. Somewhere in those quiet hours after the show, Ozzy had looked at his city and seen himself reflected back. Flawed, loud, stubborn, but full of heart. It was the homecoming he had always wanted, the one he never said out loud. When the news finally reached the world that Ozzy was gone, it didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It drifted in slow and heavy, like fog. One station broke it first, then another, and before midday every headline across Britain carried the same quiet truth. Fans didn't scream or collapse in public the way people do for sudden tragedies. They just stopped for a second, stared at the words, and whispered, "Oh mate, not him." For years they'd prepared themselves for that day, but when it came, it still felt impossible. He had always been the man who wouldn't quit, the survivor, the one who had stared down every fall and come out joking. The idea that even Ozzy could finally rest took time to settle in. In Birmingham, flowers began appearing before dawn at the Black Sabbath Bridge, that spot by the canal where his handprints were set in concrete. By nightfall, the entire walkway was buried under a carpet of tributes, guitars, candles, handwritten notes, even old leather jackets folded neatly beside photos. The smell of wax and rain mixed in the air. Buskers played Paranoid on cheap amps, and strangers hugged without needing to explain why. Inside the family home, the lights were dim. Sharon sat in the kitchen with their children, each of them lost in their own memory. There wasn't much to say. For all the noise that had filled their lives, that morning was built from silence. Friends dropped by, some famous, some just old mates from Aston, all of them bringing stories instead of speeches. One of them said that when Ozzy first started rehearsing in his mum's basement, no one could tell if he was serious or just mucking about. He had this strange way of turning mistakes into hooks, chaos into rhythm. That was what made him different, even back then. He never aimed for polish, he aimed for feeling. The same bloke who once frightened parents ended up reminding generations that it was all right to be strange, to not fit the mold. In that kitchen, someone played a recording from the final concert. His voice cracked, raw but still proud. Sharon listened, then whispered that he sounded happy, and that was enough. The world outside built its own rhythm of mourning. BBC ran a special broadcast, not flashy, just clips from the 70s, interviews, snippets of laughter. Old bandmates spoke about his loyalty, his stubborn kindness. Younger artists called him the blueprint, the one who showed that being yourself, even when messy, could move millions. Across the ocean, stadiums dimmed their lights mid-show in tribute. In pubs, people lifted glasses and told the same story, again and again, how they saw him live, how he made them believe that madness could be magic. It wasn't mourning so much as remembering. Birmingham prepared a procession unlike any the city had seen. The council closed the main streets, not because they had to, but because they knew thousands would come, whether invited or not. On the morning of the farewell, a fine drizzle hung in the air, fitting, really, for a man whose career was born under gray skies. The hearse moved slowly down Broad Street, past the landmarks tied to his name. Black flags lined the rooftops, and people threw roses from balconies. At the bridge, the procession stopped. A choir of school kids sang changes, their voices trembling but clear. Grown men cried openly, not ashamed. It wasn't a royal farewell. It was something purer, a working-class goodbye to one of their own. In the weeks that followed, stories surfaced from those who had known him best. Crew members who'd traveled with him for decades said that, despite the persona, Ozzy was gentle. He remembered birthdays, he thanked roadies by name, and he never let anyone eat alone. Musicians who once idolized him spoke about the way he'd walk into a room and instantly disarm everyone with a joke. There was no act, no mask, just an aging rock legend who still thought of himself as the lad from Aston. When asked once what success meant, he had laughed and said, "Being able to buy Mum a house and not get kicked out of pubs anymore, that was him equal parts mischief and heart." His passing reignited talk about the cost of fame, the toll it takes on body and mind. But even then, the narrative stayed gentle. People didn't dissect him, they defended him. They talked about his openness, his honesty about struggle, his refusal to pretend everything was fine. He had turned vulnerability into strength long before it was fashionable. That was why fans connected so deeply, because he never lied about being human. Around the world, murals started appearing. Ozzy's face towering over walls in Brazil, Japan, Poland, and back home in the Midlands. Some painted him with angel wings, others with his signature grin. One graffiti artist wrote simply, "The noise lives on." It became the unofficial motto of that strange summer, when an entire generation seemed to hum Sabbath tunes under their breath. Vinyl sales spiked, radio stations replayed deep cuts, and young fans discovered him for the first time, decades after his prime. Sharon later told a journalist that she didn't want his story told through grief alone. She wanted it to be about resilience, humor, and the joy he found in the absurd. She said he always joked that the real heavy metal was just love played loud. It was a line that stuck. By the time autumn came, Birmingham had planned a permanent exhibition in his honor, filled with stage clothes, notebooks, and the battered microphone stand from that final gig. They called it the Heart of Noise. People queued for hours just to see it. Some walked out crying, others smiling. All left feeling like they'd just said goodbye to an old mate. That was how the legend of Ozzy settled, not in marble, not in perfect retellings, but in ordinary moments, shared between strangers who felt like they knew him. It was less about loss and more about belonging. Even gone, he managed to bring people together one last time, proving that sometimes the loudest echo is made of love, not sound. In the weeks after the procession, Birmingham found a strange calm. It wasn't silence, not really. It was something warmer, like a heartbeat beneath the pavements. People still spoke his name in pubs, on buses, in grocery queues. They didn't whisper it in grief but in affection, as if he were still part of their daily lives. The pubs along Broad Street filled every night, not with drunken noise but with shared stories. Someone would start a memory. "I saw him play at Villa Cross back in '70, and before long, the whole table was laughing." There was always laughter with Ozzy, even when the subject was loss. He had that effect. He made sadness feel human, not heavy. The Birmingham Museum exhibition became a pilgrimage. The Heart of Noise opened quietly, yet the line outside stretched around the block. Inside, his presence was everywhere, from the battered mic stand to the hand-scrawled lyrics framed under glass. People walked slowly, almost reverently, through the rooms. There was the black coat, the silver cross, the boots that had stomped through decades of chaos, but the object that stopped everyone was the old stool from his home studio. A small note rested beside it, written in Sharon's handwriting. This is where he still sang when the body couldn't keep up. He never stopped. Visitors stood still before it, the weight of that sentence sinking deep. One woman pressed her palm to the glass and whispered, "Thank you for the noise." The city council didn't expect the turnout to last, but weeks turned to months, and the crowds only grew. People came from Brazil, Japan, Germany, even remote towns in Australia, each carrying a story of how his music had found them at some fragile point in life. The staff began calling them the Pilgrims of Sound. They weren't coming for fame or spectacle. They were coming for connection. That was the real legacy. The reminder that music wasn't built from perfection, but from honesty. Ozzy had given permission to generations to be messy, to fail, to rise again. Meanwhile, the family tried to navigate life without the noise that had always surrounded them. Sharon spoke to the press only once, in a long interview that aired quietly one Sunday night. She said Ozzy had made peace with his body long before his last day. He had accepted that his greatest work was already done, not the records, but the people who found hope through them, she said. He'd often sit in the garden near sunset, listening to birds and joking that even they sang off-key like him. She smiled through tears and said he was proud of that imperfection. He thought it made everything sound more real, she said. And I think he was right. Clips of that interview spread online. Fans commented by the thousands, sharing their own moments of struggle and how his songs had carried them through. One woman wrote that she played Dreamer for her son every night before bed. Another said she found courage in changes during chemotherapy. The comment section became a living memorial, full of love, humor, and shared vulnerability. No fighting, no trolling, just people remembering together. That perhaps more than anything would have made Ozzy grin. The media, for once, handled it right. Instead of gossip or speculation, they focused on the artistry, the endurance, the sheer stubborn will that defined him. BBC aired a documentary called The Last Bow, showing unseen footage from the final concert and interviews with those who'd been there. The closing shot showed him sitting on that throne, smiling faintly as the lights dimmed. His voiceover said, "If I could do it all again, it'd still go loud." It wasn't scripted. It was something he'd said offhand before the show. It became the final line of his story, replayed across television and social media like a promise kept. Local schools started teaching his life in music classes, not just for fame but for perseverance. Kids who had never touched a guitar learned about how a working-class boy with dyslexia and no money rewrote the sound of rock. Teachers said students listened closer when they realized the legend began on streets like theirs. The city even announced a new music scholarship in his name, aimed at helping young artists who, like Ozzy, didn't quite fit the mold. It felt right. The man who made outsiders feel seen would now keep helping them long after he was gone. The energy of Birmingham shifted. The graffiti walls bloomed with portraits of him, painted in golds and grays, haloed by smoke and light. Someone wrote "Still loud," still ours under the railway bridge, and it stayed untouched for months. Even the pubs carried his echo. Bartenders poured pints to the opening chords of Iron Man. Every now and then, someone would raise a glass and simply say, "To Ozzy," and the rest would nod, clinking glasses without a word. Sharon once said in another brief interview that she could still feel him everywhere in the hum of an amp left on, in the creak of the old house, in the laughter of their grandchildren. She said grief, for her, wasn't emptiness but a kind of presence. He never liked silence, she said softly. And somehow, he's made sure there's still none. That line captured everything. Ozzy's absence hadn't taken sound from the world, it had given it new depth. The roar of a crowd, the buzz of a pub, the hum of life itself. It all felt richer, as if the city had absorbed him. And maybe that's the best kind of farewell, not a final bow, but a slow blending into the rhythm of the world he loved. The man who spent a lifetime turning chaos into connection had become part of the very noise he cherished. Birmingham didn't lose its sun. It simply learned to carry his song. By the time autumn arrived, Ozzy's story had stopped feeling like a headline and started feeling like folklore. You could hear it in the way people spoke his name. Softer now, almost like a prayer. In the pubs and cafes, someone would hum a Sabbath riff under their breath, and others would quietly join in. It wasn't about mourning anymore. It was about keeping rhythm with him, keeping the pulse alive. The Birmingham nights grew colder, yet the energy around his legacy burned warmer than ever. Every week, there was something new, a mural, a small tribute concert, or a new generation discovering him on streaming platforms and asking their parents what made him so special. And parents would smile and say, "It wasn't just the music, mate. It was the honesty." He never pretended to be anything he wasn't. The press had moved on to other stories, but Ozzy's impact didn't fade. It became quieter, more intimate. In working-class homes across the Midlands, families found small ways to honor him. Some lit candles beside their record players. Others hung black crosses on their doors, not as symbols of darkness, but of gratitude. Local musicians began playing his songs acoustically in backstreet venues, reimagining the heavy riffs into tender tributes. The city's sound had changed, but the spirit was unmistakably his. Even those who had never liked metal found themselves drawn into the story, realizing that beneath all the noise was a beating heart that belonged to them too. Sharon, ever the anchor, began appearing in public again. She visited the exhibition with their grandchildren, smiling gently as the kids pointed at photos and said, "That's Granddad." She told interviewers that she felt at peace, that the hardest part was over, and what remained was pride. She said Ozzy would have been humbled by the love, and probably a bit cheeky about it too. "He'd look at all this fuss," she laughed, and say, "What are they doing? I was just having a bit of fun." That simple line spread everywhere. It reminded people that even in legend, he never lost the humor that kept him human. Abroad, tributes continued to pour in. At concerts in America, Brazil, and Japan, bands paused their shows to play a few of his notes. In Australia, where fans had followed him for decades, an entire coastal festival dedicated its closing night to his music. Thousands stood on the sand under the stars, singing along as the waves carried the sound back to shore. It was haunting and beautiful, a global chorus for a man who never asked for worship, only for the chance to perform one more time. Back in Birmingham, as winter crept in, the lights on Black Sabbath Bridge stayed lit long past midnight. People still stopped by, even in the rain, to leave a flower, a letter, or just a moment of silence. No guards, no fences, just open space and shared respect. It wasn't an ending anymore. It was a conversation between a city and its son, one that would go on quietly, rhythmically, forever. As winter deepened, Birmingham settled into a quieter kind of remembering. The crowds had thinned, the cameras gone, but Ozzy's presence remained woven into the city's daily rhythm. The bridge lights still flickered in the drizzle. Shop radios still played his voice at closing time, and you could still hear snippets of his laughter in pubs when people told old stories. It wasn't grief anymore. It was warmth, a shared memory that refused to fade. The museum exhibition extended again, and visitors kept coming, some for the first time, some returning because they couldn't quite let go. They said it felt like walking through a heartbeat, steady and familiar. One morning, the city council announced that a new music park would be built in his honor, not grand or polished, but open to everyone. A place for kids to play, for buskers to perform, for families to gather under the sound of live instruments. They planned to name it the Osbourne Stage. Sharon released a statement saying that nothing would have made him happier. He never wanted monuments, she said. He just wanted music to keep going. Around the same time, a new documentary aired Sharon and Ozzy coming home. It showed unseen footage from the months before his final concert. Moments in the garden, laughter over burnt toast, gentle teasing between husband and wife. It wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. And that's what made it beautiful. The world saw what fame had often hidden. A simple love story that had weathered decades of storms and still found light. Viewers cried quietly, not from sadness, but from gratitude. It reminded them that behind the stage, lights and chaos, was a man who loved deeply and lived fully. By the end of the year, when the city decorated for Christmas, The first snow fell across the Black Sabbath bridge. Someone had placed a small sign there that read, "The music never dies." The wind lifted the words gently, and for a moment, it felt like the city itself was humming. Ozzy's song had become part of the air in every note of a guitar, in every pub cheer, in every heart that beat a little louder when his name was mentioned. And that was the truest kind of immortality, not carved in stone, but carried softly in the noise of living.